All right, welcome to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I am Adam Schreiner here with Matthew Hart, the Beach Boys expert. I am just a regular Beach Boys fan, learning all about the Beach Boys from Matthew here. And today we are in the late 1960s room.
Yes.
And behind us, we are in the Pet Sounds corner because this is the Pet Sounds episode. So for our YouTube watchers, we got some cool memorabilia behind us. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, you can follow us at Matthew Hart's Music or Twitter, Matthew_Hart's. We have a Patreon page, and you can just search In My Beach Boys Room and find us there if you want to support the podcast. We appreciate you listening, and we absolutely appreciate any support that we get from you on Patreon as well. Okay, so Matthew and his family did some cool YouTube videos. So if you only listen and you don't watch the YouTube podcast stuff, you should hop onto the YouTube channel, which is just Matthew Hart's. And check out.
Actually, is it Matthew Hart's Music? Is what
Matthew Hart's Music. Thank you.
Yes.
Wow, look at me missing things. But there's this really cool. They did some cool covers. They did California Girls, and then they did a violin.
We did 4 violins on In My Room.
Yeah, and it's beautiful, and it's with his wife and stepsons,
yeah.
and one of your students.
Yes.
Yeah, Sam, and he was awesome. And they all, it's so good. It's so good. So if you don't check out, which we understand if you don't want to watch a podcast on YouTube, but you should definitely check out these covers because they're really cool. And as a Beach Boy fan, you'll really appreciate them. So hop on over to the YouTube channel and check those out. And let's get into this episode here. So we're going to talk about Pet Sounds. And as far as what I know of Pet Sounds is known as one of the best albums of all time, or at least up there in the top 5, always up there in the top best albums
on lists.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So why? What's going on here? Explain this to me here.
Well, I've always loved the Elvis Costello quote from the Endless Harmony documentary, and the quote is, "It's after it was dumb and goofy, and before it got weird and spooky."
Okay.
Which is a pretty simplistic distillation of
what Pet Sounds is.
Yeah.
What's going on there.
But I get it. It was kind of the sweet spot of Brian's art and the way it intersected the pop music community and just the right thing at the right time. And I think what really makes it amazing is it's definitely Brian's one of his highest works for sure. You know, some people would say the highest. I think he had several high periods, but this is the best, among the best music he ever made for sure.
Okay.
And very special chord progressions and the way the melodies are laid out against those progressions, all of the arrangements. It's really fantastic art. Then you pair that with the fact that he brought in a new lyricist, and we'll talk about him later, but the reason he brought him in is he wanted to write a different type of an album. He made a real deliberate move at getting away from the surf and
from
cars
what he
thing.
had been doing.
He already had been doing that in a way, but he was just really kind of ready to get a divorce.
Oh, okay. Just done with it.
Yeah, dude, that guy really wasn't him. He was writing about it, putting his, it's amazing how much of that he was able to tap into without being a surfer, a car guy.
Right,
and
right.
to tap into those emotions and be able to.
So Pet Sounds more of a reflection of like Brian, you would say?
Well, yeah, he knew that he wanted to do something lyrically completely different, and it's a very honest record. People say it's Brian bearing his soul, and I would definitely agree. It's an autobiographical album, pretty much, and Brian's feelings and Brian's insecurities that reflect all of the insecurities that all of us have, especially insecurities and fears about relationships and hopes and dreams and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so we have Brian Wilson producing his art at the highest level, mixed with him also just bearing his soul fully into this album.
Yeah,
so,
making himself vulnerable through the lyrical content that he brought in Tony Asher, the new lyricist for. But even before that, in '65, he heard the Beatles' Rubber Soul. He was impressed about how that album seemed to be full of great songs, held together, and he wanted to do something like that. He told his wife, Marilyn, at the time, he said, I'm going to make the best rock album ever made.
Oh, wow.
So he kind of put pressure on himself.
But also ended up doing it, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But that is a lot of pressure to kind of put on yourself.
Yeah. And one difference about Pet Sounds is the time that he finally had to develop his musical ideas.
Yeah, compared to like the previous years, right?
Yeah, the frantic pace of 62 to 65. You know, he had from the end of, or when they quit, Summer Days and Summer Nights was released about a year earlier than Pet Sounds. So there's the Party album in there also, but that was kind of a stopgap thing to buy time for Pet Sounds. But he finally
Capital off his back, right?
Yeah, and so he had the time to develop these feels. He talks a lot about writing the Pet Sounds tunes from feels, the smile, but he always kind of did that, found a little thing, ooh, there's a good hook, that can
feels
develop
like
a song.
How that music actually feels.
I know exactly what he's, to sit and play like a couple of chords together or a progression and kind of just work with it and just let it, just like, immerse yourself in it for a while and let it take you where it goes.
Okay.
That's what, talking about composing from feels and letting just ideas just naturally develop and go so anyway.
No, that's really cool, actually.
He was composing in this manner, but now he had the time to really not rush it too much. And it's wow that the album really reflects that.
That fact that he was able
the dimension, all of the complexity in the musical arrangements, but just all of the different arrangements and production ideas. I mean, you could tell he finally had a little pet project to take some time with.
To really let it develop as he wanted it to, right?
Right. And then, this album, very different because we're bringing in Tony Asher, the lyricist. And I'm not sure when he hired Tony to do the job. I know that he had... Capitol was on his back and wanted an album, and he felt like it was overdue. And I know the Beach Boys were on tour in Japan around some of this time, but I'm not sure of what the exact timeline is. But anyway, he met Tony Asher through a mutual friend named Lauren Schwartz. And Tony Asher worked at an advertising agency as a jingle writer.
Okay.
And after just this chance meeting where Brian just heard him play a little bit of music, which Tony thought nothing of other than cool, I got to meet Brian Wilson, he got a call at work. And at first he didn't believe it, and then got on the phone, and sure enough, it was him. And
wow.
And he ended up getting a leave of absence from work to go start working with Brian on Pet Sounds. And he was famous. Some of the earliest stuff I read about it, he was famously a little bit frustrated with Brian's work schedule and habits. He'd show up in the morning ready to work and have to put up with waiting for Brian to get out of bed and watch TV and eat breakfast. And then they'd get it, kind of some of that stuff. So, yeah, but not to go too far down that road, but the album has such a different flavor because of Tony Asher and Brian telling him that he wanted the album to be different. He didn't want it to be but surfing cars. He never was that dude. He wanted to be more like, just regular things that people go through, young people go through. It's about relationships. It's really, they talked about a lot of that. They'd start each songwriting session, or when
him and Tony.
They'd just talk a lot about all of these things that
topics that they like.
The relationships and all this stuff, and then the ideas would develop into songs. And generally, in a lot of cases, Brian already had the music written and sometimes recorded. So Tony had the really cool advantage of being able to take the music home with him and listen and kind of finish the lyrics at home after he and Brian had talked about what they wanted the idea of the song to be. So it was really, it was, for the time especially, it was a pretty cool, artful way to go about doing this project.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the different process
as opposed to having to crank out album after album. He actually got to sit and kind of massage this one a little bit. And
with a new guy who's coming from a new place and going to stimulate and he's Tony Asher is also a very capable musician, and he actually had a hand in writing some of the music of the tunes. I think I've seen where he said he wrote some of I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, but not just lyrically. The guy had a hand in a little bit more of it.
So are the Beach Boys, where's the rest of the Beach Boys, right? They're in Japan, is that what you said?
Yeah, they're on tour in Japan when the tracks are being made, and so most of the tracks are being made by the group of musicians everyone likes to call the Wrecking Crew for the most part.
Yeah.
And they came back from that tour to most of the album being made, with the exception of That's Not Me, which the Beach Boys are playing on. And I don't know if there's anything else, but most of the rest of it was ready to go. And they were just blown away by the tracks. I mean, it was a whole different ball game, man.
Blown away in a good way?
Oh, I think in a good way, musically, lyrically, and thematically. Some of them were a little bit worried about the direction because
so
now
different.
This is
so different, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then so they come back and
the tracks are done and ready for them to sing.
Part. Okay, right.
Now, the other cool thing about this, and if listeners need to, if they haven't already heard it, go seek out the Pet Sounds box set, because it isolates a lot of the vocal sessions. Actually, there's a vocals only version of the album on there, plus all the instruments without the vocals on it, and incredible other things. But it really, I had no idea until that box set came out of some of the intricate things you don't even hear on that are buried.
Wow.
Yeah, some really intricate vocal things that he had composed and arranged for the record. And I just think of him having to teach them that. All of those guys had to teach them the parts and then get them to sing it that well, that quickly, to learn that kind of, it's just pretty dang amazing. And so that's what the Beach Boys came back to, was these great tracks. And then he was a taskmaster on the vocal sessions, famously at this point too, of wanting everything to be just
perfect.
Right. Yeah.
And so is Tony Asher around while they're doing this?
Yes.
And
And because Brian met Tony through Lauren Schwartz, we're going to talk about this a little bit, because unfortunately, or not unfortunately, the way you look at it, marijuana and LSD come into the picture, in 1965 in Brian's life. Mm-hmm. And we have to talk about it a little bit here, because it definitely did influence the creativity that happened here. These were a new group of people that Brian was hanging out and that were introducing him to these things. And Mike in particular wasn't too fond of some of these new friends. And some of the other guys were also kind of,
standoffish.
Hey, what's going on here? Who are these new guys? Who's this new guy writing the words? What's he doing hanging around? And that actually, I think there were some offensive things said during a session Tony was at, probably by Mike, and he says, I was like, why do I need to be here?
Yeah.
But that came from a place. Mike is, in 65, he was doing a lot of writing with Brian, and had been during the early years too, off and on with other collaborators. So but this is the first, I think, really the first time Brian made that statement, not making, hey, I'm going to bring in somebody and do something completely different.
Right.
And so that had to be on an ego level.
Sure. Yeah.
Speaking of ego.
Yeah. So the Mike might have already kind of had a bad taste in his mouth, right? Even without maybe even interacting with Tony Asher, maybe.
Right. But it definitely, Tony he was a target.
Right.
When they came, for the new direction and all of this stuff. And I don't think it was real comfortable. Well, I know it wasn't really comfortable. He talks about it, Tony Asher does, at that time. And he's been able to kind of get over some of that in the years since then, just because Pet Sounds has become such a great success story.
Right, yeah. And so they come back, they lay down the vocal tracks, which you said were crazy, different, complex. And so then let's talk about some of the tracks then. So then... Well, yeah.
And I'll tell you, one funny thing is one of the engineers that I think worked at either Western or Capitol, they talked about Brian taking all this time to make this album, the instrumental tracks, and then taking all the time with the vocals and everything. And then he went in and mixed it in like one day, just like speed mixed it.
Oh, really?
Almost. Yeah, that's a famous story about, and there's some talking in Here Today. There's some, let's just say there's some dirty spots on the album where you can hear some talking and where there shouldn't be, and everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I mean, I always think he intended to leave some of that stuff in there.
Sure.
So he was always thinking ahead of the game anyway, but
So he was really, really tuned into how they record these vocals, but then when he went to mix it, he just cranked it out.
It seemed like to the other musicians, I think it was Steve Douglas that was saying this, the sax player from the Wrecking Crew that did a lot of the contract work with Brian too. And he said, yeah, it took all this time to make this masterpiece, and then just runs in and masters it in one day.
Crazy.
Just kind of.
Well, I mean, maybe it kind of makes sense. You take all the time to get the takes right, and then mixing's a little easier.
There's a lot. There's so many different avenues we can go down there with the whole mixing thing, and Brian doing everything in mono at that point and stuff, and how much he really expected people to hear and how much was it really implied.
Right.
It's crazy things like that. Yeah. Well, I do
want to
talk about the tunes.
I mean, we're talking about arguably one of the greatest albums of all time. So let's talk about some of these tracks here.
Well, can't let me go on forever about
all
of them.
I'll try
I think what we're going to do
follow
is
you down a little bit.
We're going to, let's go through them one by one. Wouldn't It Be Nice, I think, is probably the most perfect pop song ever.
Yeah.
And
you have a cool, that at the beginning of this podcast, that's Matthews. He did we did the stand-up bass, the
couple of guitars and
a violin.
Yeah.
That's on YouTube as well. You can check out. Anyway, Wouldn't It Be Nice?
Yeah. So, I mean, just even from the opening, one of the most ridiculous things I've seen on the internet recently is some guy said, I want to kill the ice cream guy at the beginning of Wouldn't It Be Nice? Because there's that it sounds like an ice cream truck. And to me, he's like saying that takes away from the song, and I'm like going, no, that's like this little dream sequence that you get this great big snare drum at the end of, and all of a sudden it just explodes into this tune. And then to find out that when I finally heard Stack of Tracks was the first time that I figured out that same riff from the intro is recycled into that crazy bridge, and I just oh my God, what an amazing tune. And the singing on that there's some counterpoint harmony on that. And Mike's bass part has some counterpoint in it that I just love, which I think Brian talks about doing stuff based on Bach in Pet Sounds. And there's some of that. There's some counterpoint stuff in the vocals that I'm sure he's talking about, and instrumentally. But I can go on and on about Wouldn't It Be Nice, because it's just, most days it's my absolute favorite.
Yeah, it's up there with me too. But let's keep. We got something.
Okay, everybody talks about that one. You Still Believe in Me started life as a song called In My Childhood. There's a bicycle bell and a horn on the end of the instrumental track that couldn't be taken out when the song was still going to be about that. But Tony Asher wrote new lyrics about it. It's called You Still Believe in Me. I always, David Leaf interviewed Paul McCartney when Pet Sounds was re-released, and he made special mention of especially the harmonies in the end of "You Still Believe in Me," and there's a magical flat 6 chord in it that just is really, really nice. I always think of it as a nice pivot point in that, but that's kind of music nerd stuff.
Yeah, music nerd stuff. Yeah, that one went over my head. So
yeah, love that one. That's Not Me. I love it because this is the Beach Boys playing on Pet Sounds, which everybody I talk to thinks the Wrecking Crew did all Pet Sounds. Nope, we got Brian on the organ here, Dennis on the drums, Carl on a guitar. There's other people involved too.
But they're in there.
They're in there, but it's a very simple, sparse production compared to the rest of Pet Sounds being very dense. This is like just a few instruments, and curiously, it's by the actual Beach Boys.
And so this one, well, obviously they recorded this one when they got back. This was part of it.
I think that is right. I think that this one is one of the latest Pet Sounds tunes recorded.
Gotcha.
Right,
okay.
right. And great tune, notable key changes. I remember teaching this at a music camp a couple of summers ago, and one of the other instructors, we were just talking about the key changes in this one just being so crazy and sometimes going in a direction that you would never guess, but it's so right, it's unbelievable, you know?
Yeah.
Don't Talk, in parentheses, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. A Brian solo tune on here. There's no harmonies on here. On the box set, there's a piano demo of just Brian banging out the chords on this one, and you would not, if you're just if you're not a musician, it's hard to make the connection that this tune that he's playing on the piano demo is the same song as Don't Talk, but it's one of my favorite things on the box set. And it really illuminates how Brian thinks about chord progressions. And that chord progression in Don't Talk is just spectacular. I mean, just, well, high-level stuff.
Yeah.
And the string arrangement that he does in Don't Talk is top-shelf stuff, too. It's, you know, writing for there's a little mini orchestra, like a couple of violins, violas, and cellos that are doing a little mini thing in the middle of that. And it's just really, really, really nice.
Nice. Okay, Don't Talk. So what do we got next?
Okay, then we come to, I hate to say this is my least favorite Pet Sounds tune.
Least favorite Pet Sounds?
Yeah.
What's this one?
Actually, it was written 2 years earlier, too. The copyright on this one is from 1964, and it's a Brian and Mike tune from that period that for some reason didn't get put on anything, and Brian put it on this collection of tunes. It's really notable.
What's the name?
It's excuse me. I'm Waiting for the Day.
I'm Waiting for the Day.
Yeah, and most people make note of the percussion. There's some pretty big timpani stuff in the beginning of it, and I do like. There's a great 6-string bass part, a little descending line that's really cool on it, and it's a great tune. There's something about maybe the stop-start of the percussion aspect of it that makes me not kind of resonate with it so much. But I have to. I love sitting and I was playing the guitar with it not too long ago. It's a great tune.
Okay.
You know,
just not up there for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
After that, we've got the instrumental "Let's Go Away for a While," and then so about a year after this, Brian was quoted. They asked. I guess he was just quoted as saying that this was the most satisfying piece of music he had ever made to that point. And this is after Good Vibrations and Smile, I think, is when the interview was done. And so he talked about specifically Let's Go Away for a While. And it is so lush. It's like you're watching a movie soundtrack from the 1960s, or you're listening to a music soundtrack from the some apartment in Hollywood,
sure, yeah.
You know, kind of, and it's basically, it has no melody to it either. There's no melody on it. It's a series of chord progressions and feels that are kind of stitched together, but it was all done live. But one of my favorite quotes from Brian on this is, they said, well, what's so special? I guess it was probably when he said it was the most satisfying piece of music he'd ever made. And I said, what's so special about it? He goes, try to hum it. And it was kind of insight because there's no melody.
Yeah. Okay.
But okay. So that's both of the instrumentals on Pet Sounds. I encourage people to give those repeated listenings.
Okay.
And put your headphones on and listen
Close
in
your
the dark.
eyes
Yeah,
and
really
do
do a lot of visualization, and you'll see a master painter. You'll see an art. That's cool. Really what you'll get out of it. Okay, after that, Sloop John B., which we've already talked about when they released it as a single. We talked about it was being cultured in late 1965. That's at the end of side 1 here on the album, and it always gets a lot of flack for being out of place. Like, where's this Sloop John B. in the middle of all these tunes that are, the rest of it seems to be based on a concept. About a burgeoning romance between young people, and then going through all the ups and downs, and then getting to the end, and where did your long hair, well, where's Sloop John? Do you think, where's the guy on the ship?
Yeah.
And for years, it was hypothesized that Capitol just insisted that it was included because it had been the hit right before Pet Sounds was released.
Okay.
Which would have made sense. But then I saw a handwritten list in, I can't remember which book it was, but it's not been too long ago, 5-6 years ago, that Brian submitted of the tunes for Pet Sounds, and Sloop John B. was on the list.
Oh.
So that shoots that right out of the water.
Yeah, exactly. I was playing the whole time.
It also, it's like it's the ending tune on side 1, and so it's kind of a nice break, and kind of almost a little intermission and then at the very end the lyric gets twisted to "This is the worst trip I've ever been on," and some have hypothesized if that's not a little drug reference there,
Yeah.
And so anyway, there you go with that. And I hope we've talked a little bit so far about a lot of people consider Pet Sounds to be a concept album.
No, yeah, we haven't really talked about that yet.
Should I wait and talk about that after?
No, go. Just we'll drop it in right here. We'll take our own little intermission here.
Yeah,
and then we'll get
right
back
to side 2 after this. Okay, I should have mentioned in the beginning that most people consider Pet Sounds to be one of the first concept albums in rock and roll, and because it kind of seems to follow a relationship and the ups and downs and the end of it, sort of a thing.
Right.
And you ask Brian and Tony, they never really had that intention because of the conversations that they were having about the different things Brian was wondering about and all kinds of crazy stuff. Those songs grew out of those discussions, and those discussions were about relationships. And so it kind of just naturally took that sort of a shape, they said. But you can really say that it does. Most people say, boy, it just sure from Wouldn't It Be Nice, everybody's all happy and ready to go to Caroline No at the end of, wow, man, it's gone.
Yeah.
It seems to be in there.
Yeah.
And if it was in there, if they were subtly, this would be a nice little break before you go into side 2, the opening tune, God Only Knows, which of course Paul McCartney has said about that. It's his favorite. It has said multiple times it's his favorite song, of all time.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's not the only big dog that said that.
Like
About that is an amazing composition. From a musical standpoint, it's hard to decide what key that song is in. It's so ambiguous, and it shifts 3 major times. It must have been the marijuana. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you say
how a composer really. Those are such fantastical ideas. It's almost like you just almost had to let something like that happen and just follow it, and just, because you couldn't be thinking logically to come up with some of the stuff, though it is very, very musically logical in the end, because his ear was so supreme.
Right.
Is so supreme. But and then you've got Carl's vocal on that, and then it just becomes, you could argue that this is the signature tune of their career.
Really?
It's that a few years ago there was a big thing on the internet where a lot of heavy hitters from the music industry, I wish I knew more about those people, but they did a pretty famous
cover
video of this. That was, and it was probably a lot longer ago than that. But I remember, it's just, God Only Knows is up there. I mean, the fact that you got that tune and Wouldn't It Be Nice on the same album, thing. And with God Only Knows too. Yeah, the production on that one with there's accordions on this and Wouldn't It Be Nice. I never knew that till Stack of Tracks. I guess I heard it on God Only Knows. I never really heard it on Wouldn't It Be Nice until Stack of Tracks without the vocals,
Mm-hmm.
The French horn idea, there's the way that one of the pianos, they put a bunch of masking tape on the piano wire so they could get this special piano sound, all that stuff was done. This is pre-synthesizers, and so all of these crazy production ideas, some of these he stole from Phil Spector, but a lot of it was, hey, how do we get the job done? Much crazy stuff being done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we can go on. We could wax forever on God Only Knows, but we got to get to I Know There's an Answer, which did not start as I Know There's an Answer.
That wasn't the name initially?
The name was Hang On to Your Ego.
Hang On to Your Ego. I remember they reference this in my main source of information with Beach Boys in Love and Mercy. He talks about it. I remember in that movie being like, is this about drugs or is this a drug song?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and this is one where Mike had a question about, hey, what are these references to? And there was enough contention. I don't know if it was as much as there was in Love and Mercy.
Right, and a little dramatization.
But they wrote new lyrics to it and call it I Know There's an Answer. It's still the same sort of a message, but just kind of,
not so druggy.
Well, I don't. Yeah, not as it. I don't.
So do you know they changed the lyrics? Does anybody ever? Do people know what the original lyrics?
Oh yeah,
were?
they're
out there.
I've got the recorder. I have the takes of when they did it as "Hang On to Your Ego."
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a great. And people have covered it as "Hang On to Your Ego." There's a guy named Frank Black, and I think he's with a group called the Pixies back in the '90s. There's I think a punk or a new.
Oh yeah, the Pixies. They had a couple of really famous songs.
Okay, well anyway, he covered "Hang On to Your Ego" on a solo album of his, I think, and did it as "Hang On to Your Ego."
Gotcha.
But this one it's a crazy little tune. Carol Kay calls it his Royal Blues, and it does have a heavy blues aspect to it, and some of the movement of the melody and the chords and stuff like that. It's a neat tune. I like it a lot. Yeah. After that, Here Today, another great tune that has a great bass line. I think it's a Fender P bass played way up high. I'm not sure who's playing that part. It's a great tune, but this one and I Know There's an Answer, I have to, they're right in there behind I'm Waiting for the Day. They're not Pet Sounds tracks I listen to all the time. Okay. Now, after Here Today, though, comes I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. And this one, we'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about my Pet Sound story, but this one is very, very special. The chord progression, the bass lines in it, Brian's message and Brian's vocal on it, just a magical tune and a magical record for me. So even talking about how much I love Wouldn't It Be Nice, and God Only, you know, some days this is my
This is
favorite
it?
song.
Wow.
Yeah. This is, so many neat musical things about it too. Just really, really, really cool. It's another one of those buffets. They're all these tunes are buffets for musicians. So then after that, I guess actually let me talk a little bit about one of the first bootlegs I got. Pet Sounds, or one of the first bootlegs I got related to Pet Sounds. I found this on the Yellow Dog label. I think I found it in downtown Boise.
He's holding a CD that says the Beach Boys, the Pet Sounds Rehearsals.
Yes, and this came out in the 90s. It's got some sessions from Wouldn't It Be Nice, a whole bunch from I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, and You Still Believe in Me, and then I'm Waiting for the Day. So just 4 tunes. But the sessions for I Just Wasn't Made for These Times they're really, really cool. There's a harpsichord that's on the track that I really love, that you can really hear in these sessions and hear him going through the chords he was playing. But also Glenn Campbell, the famous Glenn Campbell, who had been playing on Beach Boy Records before he officially became a Beach Boy and toured with them for a few months, like we talked about in 1965. Well, he's back playing in the sessions on the Beach Boy Records. Okay. And initially on this tune, he was playing a banjo, a 5-string banjo, just strumming it. And you can hear it. The sessions are on this bootleg have Brian going through several takes of it and he just does not like that banjo. And finally, he asks, and he says he's not getting too many notes or getting the notes he wants. And he says, "Do you have a box?" Which means they always talked about acoustic guitars being box guitars back then. Well, one of my favorite, I think it's in a Pet Sounds book. It might be in Kingsley Abbott's book. I don't think it is. I love all these books on Pet Sounds. But they talk about Brian asking Glenn if he has a Vox. They think he's saying, which is a particular type of amplifier or a pedal or something. And I want to go, no. He's asking him if he's got an acoustic guitar instead of that banjo.
Oh, okay.
And then so they do shift gear, and that's Glenn is playing banjo on I Know There's an Answer. That so there's a banjo on Pet Sounds.
Oh, okay.
But there was originally going to be one on I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, and they shifted gears and decided to have a guitar instead. So that's a kind of a fun little story on that
there.
one.
Got it. Okay.
After that, you have the other instrumental, which is the actual song Pet Sounds. And I guess Brian composed this and actually did submit it for a James Bond movie that was being made at the time. And this song had the working title of Run, James, Run.
Oh.
And so it didn't get, he didn't get that gig for it, but he decided to put it on the album. But you guys listen to Pet Sounds now and imagine it rolling over the beginning credits of a James Bond film.
Right.
And tell me that you aren't looking at that tune in a whole different light. Because a lot of people say, where is this? Let's Go Away for a While makes sense because it fits more of the mood of the rest of the album. Mm-hmm. And then Pet Sounds itself is kind of a jarring, almost has a Cuban feel to some of it because of the percussion. It's more of that, I call it that 60s exotica music that was. It's hard to explain, but it's really cool. It's more like it really is music for like films,
right.
So if you have those sort of visualizations on these instrumentals, it'll really help you out on that. Then after Pet Sounds, you've got Caroline No, which people have always wondered who Caroline was. He had a girlfriend, Brian did, in high school named Carol Mountain, that I think, and people thought that was who the Carol was. And because originally Tony Asher said the lyric was going to be, "Oh, Carol, I know." And Tony Asher mistakenly heard it as Caroline No.
Oh.
And so that's... that's the tie-in with the carol from Brian's high school days. But Marilyn always says, I really think that tune is about me because I had just cut my hair. The song says, where did your long hair go? Where is the girl I used to know? And a lot of the album has to be about Brian's relationship with Marilyn and her family.
Sure.
And that tune is just absolutely beautiful. It's it was put out as a Brian Wilson solo record. I don't know if we mentioned that. Oh no, we hadn't talked about that. Yeah. That's when it was released as a single. It was under the name Brian Wilson, not the Beach Boys.
Oh.
And don't know if that was Capitol trying to test market Brian as a solo artist, or Brian's idea to want to do something on his own, see what would happen. Mm-hmm. But that's just another kind of curious thing about that wonderful tune. But it's still a favorite for a lot of people, been covered by so many people.
Okay, so, and is that it?
That's all the tunes. And then at the very end, we got Louie and Banana.
Louie and Banana.
That's Brian's dogs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he brings them in, and you can hear them barking at a train that's going by. Kind of the whole Doppler effect thing. Uh-huh. There's a train that comes by, and you can hear it go by. And Brian brought his dogs in to bark while that was going on. Oh, nice. Don't know where they got the sound of the train, but the funny thing is, and this I've found this out way before the box set came out, but there's some funny outtakes from that dog barking session where they asked the engineer, Chuck Britz, they say, hey, Chuck, is it possible we could bring a horse in here? And I beg your pardon? Honest to God, the horse is tame and everything. We'll bring his trainer. They were just BSing him.
Yeah.
They were just seeing how far they could push.
Yeah. So is that pretty much it as far as the production of, because I have a question for you, but I want to make sure that we don't. We covered everything as far as the process.
Yeah,
the tracks.
Maybe the photo session, which is really cool. They just unearthed footage from the San Diego TV station of them shooting the cover for Pet Sounds, which they went down to the San Diego Zoo and shot that cover with the goats on the front. Mm-hmm. And there's the stuff about why is it called Pet Sounds, or whose idea was it. Mike says it was his idea. Brian says it was Carl's idea. Nobody's really gotten to the bottom of it. And then I think just to make matters worse, they went and got pictures of themselves with goats.
Yeah. It's really mixed things up there.
You talk about different.
Yeah.
You go from surfboards and cars and stuff, and then we're all of a sudden, feeding the goats.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah,
right?
Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth, I think in the Don Was documentary, he said, I remember going in and looking, and what is this?
Okay, so then one thing I want to know is that I've heard that it was a bust when it first came out, and now
in America.
In America, but now it's one of the greatest albums of all time. So how do we go from a bust to this legendary album?
Well, it was a bust sales-wise, but it wasn't a complete bust, I guess. It didn't go gold at the time like all the other most of the other Beach Boy albums had.
Okay. So you're saying it actually did do okay though?
It did okay, and the single "Wouldn't It Be Nice" back with God Only Knows "Wouldn't It Be Nice" got to number 8. It went top 10. Okay. So that drove it a little bit, and then
not quite a bust. Just wasn't as good as what they had been doing.
And then Sloop John B had been released beforehand and had gone to number 3. And then
it doesn't seem like a bust.
The Caroline No, released under Brian's name, I think went to number 32, even like that.
Oh.
Right? So there's definitely those tunes, and the initial success that they had, I think, grew Pet Sounds some sturdy roots.
Okay.
To where the legend would always be there, it would be eventually found.
It would have been, it just took a little time.
Right. It took it. So in England, it was a success. I'm not sure exactly what the album got to in England, but it got pretty high, and so it was a success there on a commercial level, but on an artistic kind of critically, it was a huge success over there and got huge endorsements. Bruce Johnston took, I think, a copy before it was released over to London and hung out with Kim Fowley and Keith Moon of The Who, and actually did a press release for the album over there, and some heavy hitters, including John Lennon and Paul McCartney, came to listen to the record, and there's really cool stories about that. But they were just absolutely thrilled and floored by it. Eric Clapton talks about how he was immediately just impacted by it while he was working with Cream. The Rolling Stones manager at the time, Andrew Loog Oldham, I think is how you say his name, he has, in a couple of documentaries, at least one, maybe it's Beautiful Dreamer, he talks about Pet Sounds being the closest thing to an adult religious experience he's ever had in his life when he heard it. And he, with his own money, and this is the Rolling Stones manager, he took out a full-page ad in one of the London music magazines at the time, telling people how great this album was, that it was the greatest thing he had ever heard. And
why? like, I mean, just because he had that much passion about it? Or?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how. So it wasn't really commercially successful in America, but at the same time it was having that sort of impact, which cemented it.
Totally. Okay.
Cemented it. It was just going to try
commercially it finally got caught up over time.
A lot of people were going to have to catch up to Pet Sounds. And that's kind of what happened through the 70s and the 80s. When I started reading books about the Beach Boys in the late 70s, I remember, just reading about it was a little bit not too many people knew a whole bunch about Pet Sounds on a wide level at that point. So it's a strange scene now to think that, of what esteem it's held in now, to see what a little thing it went through,
Totally.
Now, in the early 90s, when I was in college, the word got out. People have to put this into context. This is when CDs were first getting going.
Ooh,
and
big deal.
Groups were releasing their catalogs, starting to dribble out their things that we've been hoping for and hadn't been able to hear. Well, anyway, Pet Sounds was going to be first out of the gate for the Beach Boys, and we knew it for months ahead of time via the magazine. There was no internet or anything.
Right.
Man, we were, this meant a lot of things. We were going to be able to hear Pet Sounds on a CD, not a scratchy vinyl record. We know we're going to be able to hear more of it than we probably have, so we're excited about that aspect. But we also heard there's going to be bonus tracks on it.
Ooh.
From a couple other things that wasn't on the original album that were in. Man, it was a lot of build up, but it
lived up to it.
It did. The Doonesbury cartoon, are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay, I barely am, and I should be way more familiar with it. But famously at that time, he did a real famous cartoon that was about a guy that had AIDS and he was dying, and the one thing that he had dreamed about his entire life was for the re-release of Pet Sounds on CD, and it happened before this guy died. This was actually a series of cartoons that wasn't just one. It was like and it was just it's recreated in several of the books or reprinted, and it was a big deal in the music world, and for Beach Boy fans, it was a big moment. And I want to say that moment was probably the biggest in propelling the new interest in Pet Sounds. There had always been growing interest just in music communities you had to be hip enough to know, you know, but every once in a while you'd meet somebody and they, you know, they'd talk about it and you get to discuss it at length, but it just wasn't widely known until kind of this moment where it got re-released, and then it's just like, whoa, man.
Yeah.
The Katie bar the door, man. There is a lot of people out there that have loved this record and have for a very, very long time, and then you've got it showing up on all these best of, you know, in some list the best album of all time.
Yeah, totally.
Or
no,
the
I've
top
seen that.
3, you know, it or Sgt. Pepper, or you know they were always jockeying for,
right,
and it will still show up on most lists, you know, and didn't even go gold when it was originally released in 1966. And
well, that's why I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah,
I mean that was why I wanted to ask the question, was because it, you know, just
initially Capitol was not happy with it either. When Brian took it to play it for him, Mike Love talks about going with him, and when they played the album for him, the executives were kind of nonplussed.
Yeah,
they were like, "Where's the hits?
Right.
Where's Barbara Ann? Where's you know, Surfing US? You know, we're
fools."
Yeah, but well, I just think, how do those guys feel now? Yeah.
Fools.
Man, you know, and how does, you know, to Brian, it was heartbreaking for him that when it got released and it wasn't successful commercially, it was damaging to him.
Yeah.
And it caused some of his retreat. Good Vibrations saved that for a little while before the whole Smile debacle. But this initial resistance to Pet Sounds, or not the success he was hoping for his great masterpiece, nobody could appreciate it the way he wanted them to in the time. Right. But what a beautiful thing that, coming full circle, it was everything. You know, it just took a while to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Took a while.
It wasn't
to
made
get
for
there.
these times, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one thing that I noticed with this being such a profound album for so many people is I kind of have, like, you know, some big dog musicians. They talk about how and when they discovered Pet Sounds. So I'm curious to you, with your musical background, what's your Pet Sounds discovery story?
Yeah, mine, like a lot of my Beach Boy things, it's weird. You reminded me of one Tom Petty quote that I love that he says about Pet Sounds. He goes, you know, concerning that, he goes, I just don't think you can write better music than that. You can probably write music as good, but it just doesn't get any better than that. You know, I mean, that's one thing from one guy.
Sure, but I mean, a pretty well-known, respected guy.
And so my Pet Sound story is wild just because of when I was born in 1969 and when I became a Beach Boy fan in the early 70s. Just all of this context was all out of whack for me. I had some family friends that had a compilation album I think it was called High Tide. It had a picture of just a beach with water on the front of it. And it had God Only Knows on it. But I was so young, the only thing I remember is the accordion at the beginning. I didn't know it was. I just remembered that sounds like sand. I remember my little mind going, "It sounds like sand." And I knew that it wasn't a song that I was really familiar. I knew it was beautiful, but I was so young. I remember that being my first exposure to anything Pet Sounds was that, and that it sounded like sand. I also got an import copy of the Live in London album. I think it was printed in Holland, famously, and I need to get that out and show somebody sometime. It should have been here for a prop. But anyway, they do that concert's done in 68 and 69, and they do several of the Pet Sounds tunes live. And so that's actually where I would have heard Wouldn't It Be Nice for the first time.
Okay.
God Only Knows, Sloop John B is on there, but I think I knew a little bit about Sloop John B. So I still didn't know anything about Pet Sounds, but I knew I was digesting my mom's 3 albums, Summer Days, Concert, Little Deuce Coupe, and then I had gotten Endless Summer for Christmas. So I know there was another cousin, Kathy Wokerseen, that actually had a copy of Pet Sounds that I saw, but I never heard. So my grandma, when I was 10 years old, bought me my first Beach Boys book. It's the book that was put out in 1976 by John Tobler. And I remember reading that and reading about Pet Sounds and how wonderful it was and how impactful it was, and going, oh my gosh, I wish I could find that. In those days, you could not find copies of anything. The things had not been re-released,
like mass distributed or anything like
no.
that.
And then the Beach Boys actually went through a lawsuit with Capitol Records in the late 60s that led to Capitol kind of penalizing them by kind of deleting the catalog.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of the records were out of circulation. Like I would look at the back of my albums and they'd have the other ones advertised at the bottom. That's what you'd see pictures of them.
And you couldn't get it?
I didn't hear the Today album until it was released in the early 90s, because I literally could not ever find a copy of it. And so that's you talk about delayed gratification on some of that stuff. I mean, I waited a long time to hear a lot of Beach Boys things that turned out to be so wonderful, including the bootleg of Wonderful. But so when about the time I was 10 years old, I went through a little bit of a AC/DC, Kiss, Rush, all kinds of other different things. Still was heavy duty into the Beach Boys, but it wasn't until I was a sophomore in high school that we had moved to Boise, and I was up on a record store on 5 Mile in Overland, and I saw a cassette copy of Pet Sounds. This is before the re-release in the early 90s. This is the late 80s sometime, or maybe mid 80s. And I remember looking at it thinking, does it have all the songs on it? I looked at it because at that time, Capitol was re-releasing some old Beach Boy albums, but like changing the title of them and leaving a couple of tunes off of them, so they were bastardized, basically.
Oh, interesting. Just to
so
they
was
can make more money
my first
later
thing.
on or something?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's some reissued copies of Pet Sounds out there called Wouldn't It Be Nice? They change the type because they figure they'll know the song more, and so but then they actually leave a couple of the songs off the album. It was just weird stuff, right?
Capitol's
and so
weird.
my
Capitol's
first
place.
Well, and I think a lot of people were probably doing some of that crap too. Those record labels, but I looked at it and I'm going, does it have all the tunes? And it did, and I couldn't wait to get home. And I had at that time a good friend, Laura Weber, who's now. She is Laura White. She lives back in Nashville. She sent me the American Band video that Malcolm Leo did in 1985, which was the first time I saw the Tammy footage, which blew my mind. But also in the middle of that is footage of them, the Beach Boys riding scooters on the Laid in Hawaii trip. And in the background is the music from I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. And I had, at that point, I hadn't even got the cassette, but I had never heard I Just Wasn't Made for These Times before that moment, hearing it in the background on this documentary. And I was just, it was wondrous music. And I think that really, like, I've got to find Pet Sounds. I've got to, if there's stuff like this on it, I've got to find this thing, man. And so I did accidentally find that cassette. And I went through, man, I've got a good friend, Scott Sumner, who can attest to the Pet Sounds fixation there when I was a sophomore and a junior in high school. I mean, it just, and even throughout college, I mean, I'd listen to it every day. I just could not believe it. But when the re-release of the CD came out, that was, with the extra tracks and more of the story, David Leaf's wonderful liner notes for not only the Pet Sounds release, but they released the whole catalog after that, starting with the earliest Out Surfing Safari and on up. And David Leaf, who we'll talk about more, I have a great story. I called him when I was in college and started a really neat little. He mailed me a few things,
cool.
including some bootlegs and some really special things. I want to save that for a later episode, but I got to meet him at a Brian concert in Seattle one time, and then I actually, when I was doing a master class at UCLA a few years ago, I almost bumped into him. But anyway, he's David Leaf. His writing on the Pet Sound stuff was so good, and it gave so much context, and that's also got his interview with Paul McCartney when it was first re-released. There's a whole, I've got it up here on my shelf, I think behind one of these books. Yeah, there it is right there. It's a whole interview with Paul McCartney about Pet Sounds and
cool.
how Paul says, I listened to Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper. He says, I kind of want to know what everybody's been doing in the interim.
Yeah.
Has there really been anything any better than this?
Right. Yeah. Wow. So that's pretty much your.
Yeah, I mean,
you could probably dig into, like you said, listening to it every day and stuff like that. But this is the Pet Sound. So, if there's anything else that you wanna.
Well, it's just it is a landmark album. These days I don't listen to it every day. I think I got so many listens of it that it's not the first Beach Boy record I'll reach for.
Sure.
But it was definitely a musical education for me to really digest that. That's an understatement. It was just wild what that did to me when I really digested Pet Sounds when I was about 16.
Yeah. Okay, well then I think that'll wrap us up then for this episode. And we thank you guys and gals for listening. And we will see you next time, episode 8, coming in a week. Have a good one.